On paper, the Olympics are supposed to be the pinnacle of human cooperation. Every nation coming together to do friend and sport and wow. But is the games that we all love to watch really as wholesome as we'd like to think? Spoiler alert, they're not. They actually start one. Olympic history. Did you know that the Olympics actually used to be a Greek thing? Most don't know this, but it's true. The ancient Greek Olympics started in 639 BC, when they finally came up with a reason to wrestle naked. Unlike the modern games, the Greek Olympics were held in one specific location, Olympia, whereas the modern games move around every 4 years. Speaking of 4 years, that's actually one of the similarities. The ancient Greek Olympics took place every 4 years. Why? Because it was only one of 4 Pan-Hellenic games, which operated on a repetitive 4-year cycle called an Olympiad. That's actually how some ancient Greeks tracked the years. You'd find old pottery with shit saying, Genst Prentium died on the 3rd year of the 61st Olympiad. There were even very complicated devices which existed just to track when the games were scheduled to take place. The Antikythera mechanism, which some consider to be the first computer, tracked astronomical cycles decades into the future, as well as the dates of the Olympiad. I just think that's neat. Some of the games were also kind of similar. Sure, they had weird stuff like mule races and a competition for heralds and trumpeters, but they also had the discus and the long jump and the go run around a little bit, which I think is the technical name for it. Long story short, the ancient Greeks fell to the Romans, and then the Romans fell to some fancy guys in silly hats. Blah blah blah, 2,000 years pass, and we're in the Victorian era, home of depression, big dresses, ferns. Europe was at the height of its global dominance, and they were getting really good at coming up with new ways to show it. I'm looking at you, World's Fair. You're on thin fucking ice. So this French guy named Pierre de Coubertin thought it'd be a cool idea to bring back the old Olympics. He succeeded in 1896 when the newly formed International Olympic Committee held the first rebooted games in Athens, the Greece of its original conception. You know how when you look at the history of a seemingly innocuous product, say Kellogg's, only to find out that it was invented to, say, keep people from masturbating? Because there's shit like that all over history. So when doing research for this video, I expected to find Pierre quoted about how the games would show off the superiority of the white man or whatever. But that wasn't the case, at least not yet. The founding goal was to promote international cooperation and peace through sport by providing a platform for athletes of all backgrounds, including amateurs, to show off their skills. He even criticized rowing competitions for excluding working-class athletes. He also thought letting women play sports was impractical, uninteresting, and unaesthetic, but if he posted that on Twitter today, he'd probably be called based, so it's sort of a toss-up. Plus L, plus ratio, plus your French. So the Olympics were founded on somewhat noble principles that were immediately and very flagrantly corrupted. Take the 1904 St. Louis Olympics, which, isn't it sort of weird that they went from Athens to Paris to St. Louis, Missouri? Like, are you gonna hold the 1908 Olympics in Omaha, Nebraska? The games coincided with the World's Fair in the same location. A fair which contained, let me get close to the mic for this one, human zoos. Has there ever been anything more racist than human fucking zoos? Jesus Christ. Was not there that day. The person who arranged those specific games, James E. Sullivan, was considered by historians to be an asshole. He was a white supremacist who believed that the genetic superiority of Northern Europeans was manifested in their peerless athletic prowess, and sought to demonstrate that in his events. It always comes back to eugenics, doesn't it? And how did Mr. Sullivan attempt to prove the superiority of the great Nordic race? By organizing the Special Olympics, which pitted indigenous people from the human zoo against each other in a series of athletic competitions that served as a covert means of gathering anthropometric data to support white supremacist theories. These events were part of the period's broader currents of scientific racism, whose proponents sought to identify a biological basis for race and racial supremacism. As I'm sure you can guess, Sullivan's scientific racism wasn't very scientific, and his whole squad was willing to do anything to collect the correct data. They didn't tell foreigners the rules, and they pit amateurs from the fucking human zoo against trained Olympians. But the Olympians weren't treated very well either, as seen in the 1904 marathon. Athletes were provided with one source of water for a 26-mile race in 90-degree heat. That's 32 degrees Celsius for all the incorrect people out there. Boer War veteran Len Tonyane, who was the first of 2 black people to ever take part in the marathon, finished in 9th place despite entering the race at the last minute, running the entire course barefoot, and being chased a mile off course by aggressive dogs. Please watch John Boyce's video about the marathon because it somehow manages to get even crazier. But maybe we should give the Olympics as a whole the benefit of the doubt, right? After all, the absolutely freaked up games of 1904 were much different from the ones of 2022. The Winter Olympics weren't even a thing yet. And remember that baguette I mentioned earlier, Pierre de Coubertin? He won a gold medal in 1912 for literature. That's right, they gave out medals for literature in the Olympics. They also had sculpture, underwater swimming, and tug of war. I'm kinda sad they got rid of that last one. But even if the modern Olympics managed to be less racist than human fucking zoos, one place they haven't improved is in the whole international cooperation thing. Remember that? How Pierre de Coubertin wanted a place for countries to get along in peace? Because we haven't done a great job of it. Since the Olympics started, they've been a place not for countries to get along and have fun, but to carry their geopolitical tensions onto the sport field. Score a goal. Let's talk about 1936. These are arguably the most famous Olympic Games because they took place in Berlin just 3 years before the outbreak of World War II. A lot of the tensions between fascism and not fascism, which would play out on the battlefield a few years later, could already be seen boiling over in these games. Hitler wanted to use the Berlin Olympics to show off the superiority of his Aryan cool guy association, while the rest of the world wanted to not do that. It's important to note that the Berlin Olympics were attended exclusively by the capitalist nations of the world. Until 1937, communist countries took part in a different set of games called the Spartakiad. Honestly, it's sort of a good parallel for how geopolitics operated at the time. Capitalist nations tried their best to appease fascists who used the whole thing to do nothing but spread propaganda, while communist nations simply refused to participate. And yeah, I just freaking went there. The breakout star of the Berlin Olympics was Jesse Owens, an African-American track and field athlete who won 4 gold medals. Wikipedia credits him with single-handedly crushing Hitler's myth of Aryan supremacy, but this narrative gets me a little incensed. Jesse Owens is rightfully treated as a hero. He went into the heart of fascist territory at the height of segregation and won incredible victories. So, as much as he deserves his awesome reputation, I believe it's inappropriate to use him as an example of how nonviolent protest undermines fascism. Because ultimately, all America's presence at the Games did was legitimize Hitler's Germany in the eyes of the world. The Olympics allowed Germany a significant propaganda victory. The Nazis repainted their streets and built lavish stadiums, sending a message to the world that the new Germany had their shit together. It didn't matter that Jesse Owens beat a German runner for the gold because the Olympics succeeded in their main goal, which was to rehabilitate Germany's reputation abroad. The Nazis got their fascist political views into the public eye and even ingrained their traditions into the Olympics themselves. You know the Olympic torch? The Nazis started that! Said torch, which burned for 12 days during its initial transit from Olympia to Berlin, was constructed by Nazi companies to show off the superiority of German-made products. Hi, baby. Alright, I'm gonna go pet my cat. I'll be right back. I love you. You love me. Yeah, you do. Back to the grind. Cause if a torch can burn for 12 days, then it's gotta be a pretty good torch. The person who ran the torch into the stadium, Fritz Schilgen, was chosen because of his youthful Aryan appearance and graceful gait. Like I said, propaganda victory. America didn't boycott the Nazi Olympics. In fact, they sent more athletes to Berlin than they did any other Olympics up until that point. America did, however, boycott the 1980 Moscow Olympics 44 years later. You know, in the Soviet Union, Ever heard of it? Anyone who's seen my famous list of twisted opinions knows that I believe Jimmy Carter was the best president of the last 70 years. I'd even go as far as to consider him the first quirked-up white boy to bust it down sexual style, but boycotting the Moscow Olympics wasn't one of his better decisions. Also, I still believe that if your band is bigger than 5 people, that's an orchestra, and that we should stop making movies, and that Carter and his buddies boycotted the Olympics after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, continuing a long line of Americans refusing to acknowledge things they didn't like. It wasn't the first Olympic boycott, though. Countries refused to participate in 1956, 64, and 76, and they continued to boycott long after 1980. In 1984, the Soviets pulled out their Uno reverse card and boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics, which we'll actually talk about in more detail later in this video. So yeah, the Olympics aren't the best place for international cooperation. There are some bright spots. Bright sports. Like how North and South Korea fielded a unified team in 2018, but it's never really going to be a neutral playing field. As much as proponents of the games like to treat it as such. One group of people actually hurt by this political volleyball, oh my god, are the athletes. Most Olympians experience prime bodily conditions for a very short window of time, and political disruptions can affect their careers far more than those of squabbling diplomats. For Anthony Sandoval, then 25 and the leading United States contender in the marathon, 1980 was the year when all the factors in his life and his training were just right. 4 years later, when he was a resident in cardiology, a husband, and a new father, there was not the same time concentration and physical acuity, and he had to settle for being an alternate on the United States team. That actually brings us to today. President Biden recently announced a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Beijing Olympics. The reason for this decision was the treatment of the Uyghur population by China, which is a whole can of worms I'm not going to get into. A diplomatic boycott means Biden's not going to send diplomats to Beijing, but American athletes will still be allowed to compete. Ultimately, a pretty pointless act, but one that does avoid the problems I just mentioned. It still gives Olympians their chance in the spotlight. So as much as I dislike Biden's whole vibe, I see this specific choice as a non-issue. If you've seen the other videos on my channel, you'll know that I like to rant about things I don't like. Maybe that's something I dislike about myself. Maybe that's something I should mention in therapy. And the Olympics are no different. I don't love them, I'll be honest. But the argument I've made against them so far is admittedly pretty weak. Because fine, maybe the Olympics are bad at fostering international cooperation, but that still doesn't make them a net negative. In order to prove that the Olympics are malicious, I have to show them doing something uniquely bad that would not occur in a world without them. So let's talk about part 2, Los Angeles and the Olympics. In the first part of this video, I talked about how the Olympics were influenced by world events. Now, I'd like to talk about something kind of the opposite, how Olympics change, and mostly hurt, the cities around them. 1968 is most commonly known as a year where nothing bad happened, but did you know that there was an Olympics that year? It's true. In 1968, Mexico was relatively isolationist, which they believed provided them more freedom in their ability to deal with their domestic political problems. They tried to thread the needle between the American capitalist bloc and the Soviet communist bloc. Kind of. They still practiced right-wing capitalism, but presented themselves as unaligned. Sort of a Putin scenario. The 1968 Olympics, which were to be held in Mexico City, was the country's chance to show these policies were working. It was one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and its place as a neutral ground made it an ideal host for the first Olympic Games in a Latin American country. But this isolation also allowed the Mexican government to crack down on leftist protests with impunity. On October 2nd, 1968, less than 2 weeks before the Olympics would begin, a student movement marched peacefully in protest of the government's policies. It was born out of a wave of leftist movements taking the world by storm, but was bolstered by the Olympic Games. How could Mexico spend so much money courting potential investors from abroad while not solving their problems back at home? During this march, the Mexican government opened fire on protesters, killing somewhere between 300 and 400 civilians. The world turned a blind eye. The United States government, rather than condemning Mexico for its repressive actions, directed the Central Intelligence Agency to share information about leftist movements throughout the world and supported moves to repress these groups. Despite the U.S. Embassy's full knowledge of the immensity of the massacre, the embassy maintained that the event was a strictly Mexican affair. When asking how this tragedy was allowed to happen, the Olympics are the answer. To the Mexican government, the movement represented a threat to its image of a stable country for potential investors. For President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz and the Mexican government, hosting the Olympics was the most important act of the year, and therefore, nothing could be allowed to interfere with this great enterprise. So the Mexican government cracked down hard on this peaceful movement. And it worked. The Tlatelolco massacre, named after the district of Mexico City where it took place, was swept under the rug. When British media covered the opening ceremony, did they mention the hundreds of lives lost just days prior? Of course not.
Good morning to you. In Mexico, it's midnight. In London, 7 in the morning. The end of day one of the 1968 Olympic Games. A day which has been memorable for one of the finest races this Olympic movement has ever seen.
This practice, where protest is swept under the rug, where the Olympics are used to solicit capitalist investment at the cost of human lives, still continues to this day, and there's no place clearer than in Los Angeles. Every single time LA has hosted the Olympics, terrible things have happened. For Los Angeles is the harbinger of death, a malignant spore in an unending desert of unending atrocity. That's actually a quote from the Bible. Jesus said that. In 2028, LA is scheduled to host the Olympics for the third time. It's prompted the city to launch a new initiative called 28 by 28, presided over by Mayor Eric Garcetti himself. Isn't it weird that the two largest cities in the US both have mayors named Eric? What the hell are they planning? The goal is to complete 28 major infrastructure projects by the time of the Olympics. If things didn't suck all the time, this could be the games that they're most useful, when they force cities to get their asses in gear. Like, look, some items on this list were initially planned for the late 2040s. That's like flying car times. So it's good that they're being built sooner, right? Well, no. Because, as I've talked about on this channel before, building new development doesn't always benefit the people in the city, especially when they're built for tourists like Olympic stadiums are. In New York City, there's Hudson Yards, a terrible place I made an entire video about. It was funded partly by a bid New York placed for the 2012 Olympics. As with Mexico City, for every shiny new highway lane, there are 1,000 small tragedies hidden from view. Speaking of which, I'm really glad LA is expanding their highway system. I've always said that that place needs more cars. The Olympic Games have partnered with Airbnb. It's honestly kind of poetic, because Airbnb is a company literally built to gentrify. Here's a quote from an article by Jules Boykoff, author of Power Games, A Political History of the Olympics. Olympics organizers claim that Airbnb is preferable to the cost and space of building new hotels, but this doesn't tell the whole story, beginning with who actually benefits from an influx of Airbnb units. Gentrification is a legalized method of oppression, and Airbnb aids and abets the process. Property owners who realize they can make buckets more money renting to the touristic upper class than everyday tenants jack up rents at every opportunity. This eventually forces conventional tenants to evacuate, allowing landlords to convert their apartments into Airbnb units in the so-called sharing economy. So while property owners can leverage Airbnb to their benefit, renters are left out in the cold while rents continue to rise. Dear Mao Zedong, please come back. So if you thought LA might somehow use the Olympics to do good development, their partnership with Airbnb should tell you everything about their intentions. In prepping for the games, the Los Angeles government has given the police free rein to take care of homeless people, or unhoused people if you please. This showed itself when the LAPD removed a homeless encampment at Echo Park Lake. Members of two organizations, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and Nolympics LA, organized a protest. police arrived in full tactical riot gear, even drawing their guns at protesters. They detained reporters who attempted to cover the protest. And this isn't just an LA 2028 thing. In every previous Olympic Games going back decades, displacement has been a constant. It happened in Tokyo in 2020 when elderly residents were evicted from their homes. It happened in Rio in 2016 when the favela of Villa Autodromo was destroyed. London in 2012, Beijing in 2008, Atlanta in 1996, and, get this, Los Angeles in 1984. What happened in LA in the lead up to 1984 is repeating itself in the lead up to 2028. At the start of the 80s, LA was in the crapper. Local welfare services had been cut, and the unemployment rate of the county was around 9%. But rather than fix the root causes of these issues, the city council saw the Olympics as their ticket out, especially because the 1984 Games were the first privately funded Olympics. I want to go all out during the Olympics so we give a good impression to visitors, Los Angeles City Council member Gilbert Lindsay said in August 1983. To Lindsay and the rest of the city council, that meant, once again, giving the police free rein. As many as 20,000 security guards and police officers from dozens of departments and agencies were stationed at venues, practice facilities, and Olympic villages. With help from the federal government, the LAPD acquired a slew of military-grade equipment, including specialized armor to protect helicopters from gunfire, flashbang grenades, ballistic helmets, an armored emergency rescue vehicle, and high-powered binoculars. Why say high-powered binoculars after flashbang grenades? That's just bad list management. And did two first names looking ass Gilbert Lindsay care about the homeless people he might hurt during the city's crackdown? No, silly! Instead, he proposed moving the homeless to a so-called drunk farm, saying to let them sweat it out in the sun, grow vegetables to eat, and learn a trade. LA did fucking labor camps, dude. Literally 1984. One article from The Nation even blamed the 1984 Games for racial tensions that simmered for years afterward, coming to a boil during the Rodney King protests of 1992. From 1984 to 1989, there was a 33% spike in citizen complaints against police brutality. According to a Los Angeles Times investigative report, the district attorney's office chose not to prosecute the vast majority of complaints. The 70,000 jobs created by the Olympics were non-union, temporary employment, and disappeared with the recession as quickly as they arrived. Masses of working people in union-dense Los Angeles had turned a corner toward a more precarious future. Institutional support of police brutality against a workforce either unemployed or limited to service jobs was the flammable mix saturating the streets of Los Angeles, which caught fire when Rodney King hit the nightly news. It makes sense. When you give the police fucking grenades, you're probably gonna have a bad time. Sans Undertale. And like I said earlier, this gentrification, this displacement, this racism is baked into the very fabric of the Olympics, because Olympic stadiums are built to hold thousands of athletes and hundreds of thousands of tourists for a boom that will really only last for 2 weeks. That's why you see abandoned stadiums in nearly every former Olympic city. Athens, Rio, fucking Sarajevo. It's frustrating to see neighborhoods get destroyed, and more frustrating to see them replaced with stadiums that won't even be used by the people of the city. And the same shit is repeated every 4 years, so why the fuck do we keep doing it? Conclusion. What are the Olympics if not the epitome of neoliberalism? They're used as an example of how non-violence and meaningless international cooperation can change the minds of dictators, and they're also used to cover up discriminatory practices by painting a shiny new sheen over the hosting city. Literally Nancy Pelosi. Laws are usually about class power. New developments signed off by city governments have motives beyond the developments themselves. Whenever I talk about city politics on this channel, I always end up circling back to that point. Hudson Yards appealed to big business and wealthy landlords in exchange for a couple $1 billion which could have gone to the construction of affordable housing. Getting the Olympics in your city increases tourism at the cost of a couple more $1 billion and a few destroyed lower-class neighborhoods. For city governments, this calculus is often easy, but it will always have a hidden human cost. For every $1 billion stadium, every apartment building turned into an Airbnb, thousands of families will be displaced. But the people who run large cities don't really care about that, because those are not the people with the political power. Why, if the Olympics did not exist, the monetary pressures which make it such a destructive event would still wreak havoc on poor neighborhoods. Gentrification would still exist. Massive increases in rent would still exist. But that doesn't make the Olympics themselves any less malignant. It still covers up these problems, and it would still be better if we just stopped doing it. Or at least massively changed the way we do it. The sad thing is, the Olympics are one of my favorite sporting events. I like when the world comes together to cheer for something. I like that athletes in lesser-known sports have a venue to aspire to, a place where they can have a platform. Sports can oftentimes showcase the best parts of humanity, both from the athletes and the fans. Rooting for a team allows for group collaboration in ways that are normally pretty peaceful, except if you're British, in which case you will be violent if your team loses. So maybe there's a way to salvage the Olympics, I don't know. We could start by keeping them in one place and not switching locations every 4 years. When considering a permanent location, it should be somewhere near the world center of population and the center of land. It should also have multiple climates for summer and winter games. That's why I'd like to propose the 2028 Olympics in Kabul, Afghanistan. It's got mountains, it's got hot parts, it's in Central Asia, the best genre of Asia. They even have a perfect spot for a stadium! Taliban, my people will be in touch. Thanks for watching, and please check out Olympics LA. They're doing great work. Bye!
Come